Hey guys, Keith here. One of the things that we rely on pretty heavily when we're developing the software is scripting things so that we do things consistently every time, and also to save us time and make sure that when we need to do something, the process is well defined, we run the script, everything happens in the right order. And one of the things that struck me over the last couple of months as I watch people get set up for Halloween and Christmas, etc., is how much of the activity around setup is like that. It's very much on the rails. You've got to do certain activities. You've got to batch render. You've got to upload to your controllers. You've got to configure your FPP. You've got to push all of your sequences up to your FPP and send them to all the various controllers, etc. And it got me thinking about, well, is there something we can do to allow you to script that process so that it's something that you can sort of write a set of instructions out and then run a script and have it do all the work? Now, clearly I didn't want to build another version of xLights with, that cut down or specific functionality and no user interface, a sort of headless version, etc. But I did want to find a way to automate xLights. And between Dan and myself, I guess we've been working on, well, how would we make that work? How would we have something from outside xLights interact with it? It's not perfect. There's definitely scenarios where it could produce some pretty weird results, mainly because you're effectively driving a GUI application from a command line. And so, if you start interacting with the application while the command line's trying to drive it, bad things may well happen. But, this is not about sort of trying to necessarily provide something that is bulletproof in that sense, in that no matter what you do, you can't break it, but more in a case of people that would like to automate and streamline their activities, can invest a bit of time up front, build a bunch of scripts, automate everything, and then as they go through the processes of batch rendering and uploading, etc., they can just double click on an icon and it will just cause xLights to do all the activity. Now, we haven't built out every activity, far from it. There's obviously way too much stuff xLights can do. But I have tried to pick on some of the things that, particularly at this time of year, are activities that people want to do on an often basis, and also some of those other activities that people have asked in the past for. Is there a batch way to do this or do that? So here on my screen you see a copy of xLights. It's lime green for those people not used to my videos. The lime green version of xLights just tells you that it's a debug build that I'm running, which means it's well beyond the current version of .38 that you might be using. It's basically a pre-release version of 39. Now, the way in which we've built this scripting capability is really in two ways. So behind the scenes, there's actually a REST API that Dan has put together that things can interact with. And this is quite powerful in that it opens up the options about the sorts of clients that you can use. And so I'm going to demonstrate 3 different clients for you today interacting with xLights in various ways. One is to actually build a web page and write some JavaScript and have buttons on the page that then interact with xLights and cause it to do something. Another one is to use a command line utility called curl, which is quite commonly used to, on the command line, execute a web request, pull something back. The third mechanism is I've written, well, at least for Windows, I've written a small little command line program called xlDo, which essentially adds a couple of parameters and some neat features for interacting with the curl API, making it easier to script it into shell script or PowerShell scripts, etc. Now, Dan's built a similar capability, but he's kind of built it into xLights executable itself. I didn't do that on Windows. The main reason I didn't want to do that on Windows is that would require you to run the xLights application for each instructions, and xLights is obviously a very large application, and there's a certain amount of overhead that's associated with opening something as large as xLights. And so I wanted to have a program that was very small, very quick to run. Difficult to do on OS X, mainly because of the way in which Dan has got xLights packaged and distributed on OS X, which makes having multiple programs a bit difficult on that platform. So let me walk you through examples of each one of them so you get a flavor for what they do, and I'll also give you a quick run through of the command set that has been built. I won't promise that every one of them is bug-free. I know some of them are because I've been using them and testing them, but they're not necessarily all perfect. Let's start with probably the simplest, which is a curl command. And so to do that, what we'll do is let's bring up a command prompt. So there's a few sequences. They're just little dummy sequences, which means obviously everything will run a little bit quicker. Let's grab the commands here so that I don't have to type them all out. So here's a sample command. We'll make this a little bit bigger. Here's a sample command here. So this is using the curl program. The curl program, like I said, makes a web request. In this case, it's making a web request to the local IP address, which is 127.0.0.1. It's essentially every computer's IP address is 127.0.0.1. And then it has a colon with the port number. Now, this is the port number that xLights by default will generally be listening on. It is actually possible to run two versions of xLights and control them independently. If you do that, the second version will listen on 49914. The page is in this case is xlDo automation. In this case, I'm passing in a body, which is this JSON text, which is basically passing a command in called get version. And where'd it go? Oh, there it is. And it's come back and it's returned back version, and it's given us the version of xLights. Now, the thing that provided that response, of course, was this copy of xLights that is running here. So that is one way to do it. There is another way to do it with curl. Most commands actually don't require you to need to pass it through this xlDo automation page, but there's also a page, there's actually a page called get version. And so we can also call that. And in this case, of course, it's not returning back a JSON script. In this case, it just returns back the version itself. There's a number of them, and I'll show you all of the various versions in a minute. So yeah, there's two types of curl requests that you can do. You can either call the more REST-like API version, or you can call the more generic do animation and pass in a JSON request to get xLights to do something. The other and final version is the xlDo command. Now, the xlDo command looks like this. It's xlDo -c and then the command, which is in this case, the JSON that you would have passed in. You don't have to worry about the ports and everything else. It assumes that you're using the first port. It assumes that you're using this IP address, and it sends it off, and it brings back the result as like with a result code and everything else that you can test. Now, xlDo actually has a bunch of parameters that you can pass in. If you pass the verbose thing, it will print a bunch of progress messages to show you what's going on. You can use template files and a script file, which will actually take the result here and actually place these various result parameters into environment variables that you can then use further in the scripting and some things like that. And so I'm going to show you a couple of scripts which work with the sequences in this folder. The final one, which I haven't shown you yet, is the web page. So here we have a web page. This web page is actually being read off my file system. It's just a HTML file. The HTML file is not that interesting. Obviously it has no styling or anything else associated with it. It has a button, and in this case it has a button and an entry field, and it has a couple of simple functions to make web requests to pretty much the same URL. This one's called get version. This one here is actually going to run a check sequence on the sequence that we enter and tell us the name of the file that it stores the result in. You can't actually open it. You do run into browser security issues, which limits exactly how much you can do using the web page, but I thought it would be interesting to show it. So here it is. We click the get version button. It goes off and gets the version from xLights. I have a sequence here called AAA.xsq, and if I call check sequence, and I want you to watch what happens while this happens. So we'll click check sequence here, and you can see that xLights has opened that AAA sequence. It's run a check sequence, and it's written it out to this particular text file, and it's come back and told me that this is the text file that it's been written to. And if I come down here and go file open, paste in, whoops, it would help if I cut and paste that text correctly. Copy that text, file open, Control V, press enter, and there is the check sequence result that was run by the web page talking to xLights, written to a file. So all well and good. But, you know, that's just parlor tricks. What about some actual scripts that might do something, I don't know, at least semi-useful? So let us go to my desktop and the xlDo folder, and we'll show you this folder. And here I've actually put a number of scripts here. So I've got a script here for checking multiple sequences, something for batch rendering multiple sequences, something that configures a couple of controllers and an FPP, and something that uploads sequences to an FPP. So let's start by just running one. So let's run the check sequence, because we've already seen it run, but let's run this version of it. In this case, if I open this up, it's actually, it's going to run xLights. So this command up here, this is only available using xlDo, but what it will do is it'll actually run xLights if it's not already running and get it ready for the rest of the process. And in this case, I'm calling another script with the name of the sequence that I'd like it to run check sequence on. So this way I can just call it multiple times, and when it's done, it'll have completed the 3 check sequences. So I could put each of my sequences in there. And then if you open up this one, this is the script that actually runs the check sequence. You can see it's calling xlDo. It's going to use the verbose, so we're going to see all of the workings. It is going to pass in the command to check the sequence, and the parameter is going to be the sequence that it's going to check. And then it's going to create this file called result.command, which will contain the name of the result file. So it will call that result command file, which means there will now become an environment variable called output, which it will then open up in Notepad. So what we will expect to see is xLights run 3 check sequences, open up 3 copies of Notepad, each copy of Notepad containing one of the results of check sequence. So let's give that a whirl. We click on check sequence. You can see it's nicely color coded, showing you what's going on. It's opened up the AA sequence, it's run it. Here's the check sequence result. We'll move that aside. It's now doing the second one. It's finished. Here's the check sequence result. We'll just move that one aside. It does the final one. Of course, these are very small files, and that's done, and it's done. So a fully automated run of all of my check sequences, and I have 1, 2, 3 sets of check sequence which I can now go and take a look through. let's try something else. Let's try a batch render. Now these are very simple sequences. They have like one effect for 30 seconds on one model, so they're not going to take a long time to batch render. In this case, the script uses a different strategy. So let me show you that one. Here we go. So in this case, it's going to run xLights. So again, this ensures that xLights is running. So if it's not running, it will start it up. It then runs it, but what it does is it passes in a parameter, which is whatever is passed to this program, as a template, which means essentially the JSON is going to be inside that template file. So we don't have to list it all out here on the command line. We can have another file, a text file, which just contains the JSON command that we want to run. And then when it's done, it just gives you some error messages and whatever. The actual text file itself is this one here. And we'll edit that. And here you can see that the command it's running is batch render. Batch render's got some parameters. It's got a list of sequences to batch render, in this case the 3 sequences. And then it's got another parameter here that says, should the batch render prompt if there are any issues, or should it ignore any issues and just go through and complete the batch render? And in this case, it's not going to prompt for any issues that might be in the sequence. Issues might be things like renamed models and those sorts of things. So let's kick it off. Oh, okay, so I double clicked it, but of course, that's not how it works. It requires a text file. So in this case, I grab the text file and I drop it onto the batch render command script. And so it kicks off the batch render of these 3 sequences. So over to the side here. To run the batch render, we're going to grab the batch render.txt file that has our list of commands, or the 3 sequences we want to render, and we're going to drop it onto the script file. The script file then calls it. You can see it's loaded the sequence. It's having loaded it, it will render it. There it goes, rendering. It only takes a few seconds, closes it, opens up the next one. xlB. Renders that. And finally opens up xC. Renders that. If all of our sequences only rendered this fast, eh? And once it's done, it will return a result back here that tells us that everything rendered successfully. The program, when it xlDo exits, it will exit with a return code of 0 if everything's successful, a return code of 1 if xlDo has problems doing its internal processing, and a return code of 2 if it gets an error back from xLights when it's trying to do anything. So that's a batch render using a script. Let's look at configuring in controllers. I don't know about you, but lots of people I see spend a lot of time uploading the configuration to their controllers. You need to make sure you do them all, particularly if you change one and it has a cascading impact. One of the downsides of the visualizer and all the auto channel management is that now you find yourself uploading to your controllers more often. So let's take a quick look at a script that will handle that. So here it is. Again, make sure xLights is running. Here we're going to do an upload to the controller, and it just specifies the IP address of the controller. In this case, it's an F16v4. This one here is uploading to an F48v4. And then this is a slightly different command. These were upload controllers. This is upload FPP config. And here you can specify the IP address of your FPP, whether the UDP is all or none, etc. And then you can specify whether you want the models or the map uploaded as well. So this purely configures your FPP. It's not going to upload any sequences. So this is part of the functionality of FPP Connect, not all of the functionality. The part of the FPP functionality which uploads all of your sequences is separate and will be dealt with in a minute. So that's going to upload to those controllers. Those controllers happen to be online, so hopefully this will work. And so we double click on Configure Controllers. You will see that xLights actually opens up the usual dialog boxes that it would have opened up if you were doing this yourself. It is actually driving xLights. It's not doing anything sneaky behind the scenes. And in this case, it's managed to go through and configure all 3 controllers to make sure they're up to date with xLights. So that's configuring controllers. And so the final one I want to show you is this upload sequences. So here we've configured everything, it's all ready to go. We've done a batch render, all of our sequences are ready to go. Now we want to upload our sequences to our Pi player to play in our show, because a good 70 or 80% of people out there probably use the Pi for their shows, so you definitely want to be able to automate this. So here it is. Start up xLights, and now we're going to upload the sequences. So upload sequence is the command that we're running. The IP address is the IP address of the Pi that we're sending it to. We get to choose whether or not we're going to send the media to the Pi. So obviously, if this was your master, you probably would. If it was a remote, you probably wouldn't. In this case, these are 3 animation sequences, so there's no need for me to send the media. I also get to choose the format that I want the FSCQ file to be in. This is a Pi, so V2 standard or maybe V2 standard sparse would be a good choice. And then the name of the sequence that you want to upload to. Now, just like the upload controllers can upload to any of the flavors of controllers, this upload sequence will also upload to the ES Pixel Stick and the Falcon V4s, which do support sequence upload using the FPP Connect dialog, and so consequently they should be supported through this script. So let's try this one out. Now the one thing you'll see here is this does not actually open up FPP Connect. Sorry, it hit a breakpoint in my debugger, so that's why that stopped. But it is generating and uploading those sequences, and each one has been uploaded successfully. It went very fast. These are very small sequences, so that's to be expected. It would obviously take longer if it was a very large sequence. Okay, so a bunch of different ways to run it, a bunch of examples of scenarios where you might want to use it. I will likely take these various script files, and I may even upload these into GitHub, into the xlDo folder. I'll create a subfolder under there with some sample scripts, so that if you really want to go and take a look at these, you can go and take a look at them. Now, the other thing that you will find in the GitHub repository is a document that describes all of the commands that can be run. So let's go and take a look at that. Now, it still needs a little bit of cleaning up. It's not too bad, but it needs a little bit of cleaning up. So there is the REST automation API. Now, actually, there's one thing I should mention, because it does talk about this xFade service is enabled thing, and I really should talk about that as well. In xLights preferences, there is under the, I think it's the output tab. It is the output tab. You have this option here called xFade, xSchedule. I probably should add xlDo as well, where you get to specify whether this is disabled A or B. On your computer, it's likely disabled because that's usually where it is by default. In order to use this, you need to set this to one of these two things. If you set it to A, that's probably best. All the programs assume A, and then you have to specify something special to get B. And if you specify A and then you run 2 copies of xLights, the second copy of xLights will automatically set itself to B, so you will get an A and a B And for those that have ever used xFade, it kind of relies on that behavior, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But you will want to turn this on. If you do start xLights through xlDo like I was showing, it will ensure that this is turned on. So even if your option isn't to turn it on, it will turn it on as it starts xLights to make sure that xLights is ready to go and handle any subsequent commands. So the first style of API, as I said, is the REST-like API, the one where you're doing largely gets, occasionally posts, and you're passing parameters and the command actually as part of the URL. There's some inconsistency here. I'm not entirely sure why this one passes it this way, whereas if you're going to call upload controller, etc., you can actually do a question mark IP equals and then the IP address. So there's some inconsistencies in it. That may change a little, so please don't get too wedded to the API. You may see this change over the next few releases as we settle down. Then there is the post for xlDo automation, which runs all of the JSONs, most of which the examples we've been working at have been working with these sorts of things. These are probably a little bit more stable at the moment. I think this API is going to change a little bit and definitely needs a little bit more documentation around passing the parameters. But these are the others. There are some simple things like, starting xLights. Well, this only works with xlDo. This is not actually supported otherwise. Render all takes whatever sequence happens to be open and renders it. Loading a sequence will open a sequence. Closing a sequence will close a sequence if it's open. You can even close xLights. You can create a new sequence, including specifying media and the like. I would like to get to the point where you can actually script taking a sequence that you've bought off a vendor and create like a default instance of that sequence on your layout. I want to try and take advantage of some of the work that I was started last year on model name mapping or using your XMAP files to sort of do that, so that hypothetically you can click a button, point it at a sequence, bring the sequence in, do your regular mapping, and bring the sequence up so it's ready for you to actually experience the sequence the first time on your display. That I'm hoping to get to the point where that's possible. Saving as a sequence, batch rendering, we saw that. We saw upload controller configuration. We saw upload FPP configuration. We saw the upload sequence, and we saw the check sequence. You can also change the show folder to make sure it's pointing to the right show folder. You can also do this via the command line when you're starting xLights, but yeah, this allows you to drive it externally. You can open a controller. This will open a browser for a particular controller. I'm not entirely sure that's useful unless, I don't know, somehow you just want it to open up all your controllers in your browser at the beginning of your editing session, maybe, I don't know. We showed you getting the xLights version. It is also possible to export the models.csv file and script that particular activity. I also created the export model. This is probably not super well tested yet, but in theory, for those of you that are using things like ESCQ files or exporting models as video files to then use in other places, etc., in theory, you should be able to script that activity here as well. You can, and then there's a bunch of commands down here at the bottom, and I won't go through these. These commands actually have existed for a long time. They're used by xFade when it's controlling the copies of xLights. The commands absolutely work, but yeah, they were mainly driven for that, but turning the lights on, turning them off, driving the jukebox buttons, and getting the open sequence name and things like that, all API calls. Now, of course, this is not an exhaustive list. I've got another shadow list of things that I was thinking might be useful as an API. I may get around to adding those. We're definitely interested to hear from people if there are particular APIs that would significantly improve your workflow that you'd like to see us add. By all means, put them into GitHub. and we can discuss the utility of them and the practicality of them. Obviously, there are limitations. At the end of the day, you're driving xLights remotely, and you're not going to be able to drop effects and do sequencing and the like. That's probably not an appropriate use of the API. But a lot of the administrative activities and the like should be. I mean, for instance, there's not an API here to purge your render cache. But maybe we could. That's not an unreasonable thing to add as an API. And I'm sure there's many, many others. I definitely like to make APIs for resetting Windows layouts and things like that, which have always been things that cause problems, and hopefully we may even be able to create some scripts that provide simple ways for people to fix common problems by just run this script. It will drive your xLights and fix your problem. Maybe we can get there as well. So thank you guys. I hope that was an interesting thing. I hope some of you will find the time to try it out when it comes out in 2021.39, and who knows, it'll be interesting to see the level of automation that some of you manage to achieve, particularly in the October-November timeframe when you're setting your shows up and you're going through this mundane work to try and get your show configured and running. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.